some wonderful folks who have been doing some amazing work in advanced technology, both on the IoT and machine learning applications. So first, I'd like to introduce my fellow panelists and thank them for being here. Eric Astor of Furnace Records, Steve Winter of Matatiro Solutions, Gery Pollet of Blyott, and Niousha Zadeh of Claris. And as I mentioned, we're going to talk a bit about IoT. I have been doing a fair amount of research in this area, some in conjunction with Claris, and we are hoping to share that with the Claris community in a number of weeks. So we're going to start off with that, and I'd like to begin by asking Eric just to share a little bit about Furnace Records. Of course, we've seen an incredible revival in vinyl over the past few years. The notion of embracing that warm audio is something that a lot of people associate with a retro time, a nostalgic time. But Eric, you have really married this process to some leading edge IoT technology. So I'd like to start off by asking if you could share with our audience a little bit about what kinds of tasks you're attacking with IoT at Furnace, and kind of what was the inspiration for getting started down this path?
Well, we started pressing vinyl about 12, 13 years ago. And we realized through our partners, like, what an antiquated piece of equipment a record press was. So when we decided to build our new plant in the United States a few years ago, even with some of the new technology that's being built into these presses, there's still a lot of old steam and hydraulic pressure and ambient temperature and humidity and all these things that play into pressing a good record. So we took these old 1960s, 1970s presses, we built them back up, we put PLC controls in them, and the old presses never really had a brain. They had switches and dials, but by putting a PLC in, now we could integrate some new things. So the IoT devices allow us to do a lot of things because, we're working with PVC material, we're working with different stampers and different types of master material. And as things change, whether it be the steam pressure, the steam temperature, the cold water that goes to the pressure or go to the presses, or the hydraulic, as they change, the operators might need to change the settings on the presses to ensure that every record and every cycle is a successful one. So in the past, you're running around the plant looking at dials and switches and doing all these tests, and obviously that can be pretty cumbersome, and you don't really get any data in real time. So with these pretty inexpensive IoT devices, we're able to put those on pipes, and we're able to put those on the machines, to do some pretty rudimentary things that normally we would have to do manually and kind of retroactively, or we'd have to react to things. And now what we're doing is we're using these IoT devices to proactively ward off issues, proactively change things. So on a Tuesday the presses are a lot warmer than on a Monday because these are big blocks of steel. So all of a sudden Mondays have always sucked in terms of pressing records, and now we're able to do a few things and tweak a few things to make the pressing experience every day of the week better and optimal. So so it's allowed us to do a lot of proactive and also like capturing data and looking at every cycle of every record. And it's not a perfect, it's not like pressing a CD where you have a computer that checks it and says it's good or bad. Vinyl is very subjective. So, we can kind of look at the life cycle of a press run and say, hey, was there any, spikes, or was there any lulls in any of the things that would affect a press from operating. And if someone complains and says, "Hey, I have a bad record," I can see, well, out of 1,000 cycles, we might have 3 bad ones because I see that our steam dropped. And those are the things that might cause audible issues. So it's allowed us to do a lot of things both in the moment as well as after the fact. And then that leads into training. It leads into doing things a little differently, and it's allowed us to kind of revolutionize the way that we, run the shop. So we're just scratching the surface. There's a lot more to implement, but so far it's been pretty exciting.
That's fascinating. That's a lot to unpack there, and it sounds like there's been a lot of focus on consistency. And in some of my talks with developers doing work in this area, it seems like a lot of the heavy lifting is around that initial interface with the machine. You described how these devices were never, they never really had brains before. So how did you, sort of get access to any kind of documentation for working with them, or did you just kind of have to figure it out as you went along?
We kind of had to figure it out because, unfortunately, as we started to build these presses up, we only knew what we knew, and
right.
This industry is very old, so it's not like there's a manual for these presses, and it's pretty much you talk to a guy in his 60s or 70s that has been doing it for all their life, and it's kind of a note, or oh, I remember in 1994 when this thing broke and I got covered in hydraulic fluid that I should never do X, Y, and Z. So that's kind of, it's like this folklore, it's not really a tried and true science quite yet, but that's what we're trying to change with all this new stuff. And so we hired a couple brainiac kind of engineers that came in right out of college, and they weren't kind of burdened with all that old technology or that old know-how, and they kind of came at it fresh, and was able to pretty quickly hack dumping all this IoT information into the cloud and then sucking it into the FileMaker Claris database. So that so it wasn't this long protracted kind of thing. It was like Tuesday you threw an IoT device on a pipe literally, and we started collecting data. So now it's our job to really collect all the data and make sense of it. We're, like I said, we're just scratching the surface, so there's so much more to do.
Fantastic, thanks. So Steve, I want to move on to you. You I know have done quite a bit of work with devices that have documented APIs, but there can be some challenges there as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Having documented APIs is very useful, but oftentimes what you're ultimately trying to do, as Eric's saying, is you're trying to put new technology into older situations, or into situations where that technology hasn't gone before. And then you're also trying to join that up to a modern system that you're building, or that you hope to build. The idea of being able to slap a sensor on a pipe and start gathering data really makes this sort of, the ability to join these things together really quite important, and it gets you that sort of data that, as Eric's saying, you can use to build and look at how your systems work, how your processes work. Look at how, by monitoring the movement of goods through your processes, how you can improve your processes. And so, yeah, documented APIs in the IoT world, they tend to be quite focused on how they are doing things. And oftentimes the challenge comes in how you go about translating what that API expects you to do into the situation, the problem that you're trying to solve, and how you go about kind of moving from one to the other. And I think that's in some respects where FileMaker developers are quite well placed, because FileMaker is all about finding creative solutions to an existing problem. And so with IoT, you're really just adding another tool to your kit that you can look at it, how can I creatively use this new tool to build into existing systems, and also to look at how that can influence the systems that exist already and the processes that go around that.
Thanks, Steve. Gery, I know Steve and I discussed quite a bit about asset location. He's done quite a bit of asset location in his IoT work, and I know that's the heart of the task that you have been working on with Sense and Nexus. So I was wondering if you could share a bit about how you're using IoT in that application, and also, and this is a bit of a segue to chatting with Niousha in a bit, the combination of IoT and machine learning.
Yeah, so the story started end of 2018 when I was asked by a leading hospital in Belgium to talk a bit about IoT and also Internet of Medical Things. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the meeting, they came to me and they said, you know what, we are looking, in fact, for a solution to track and trace assets in the hospital. And they asked me to do some market research. So I started doing a study looking at all kind of different technologies, going from RFID, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, ultra-wideband, name it. I did a whole study and I was a bit amazed about the complexity and the costs of these solutions. So I came back to the hospital and I said, why don't I create a startup and you become our first customer for doing that? And that's actually what we did. So we started last year building everything, but very soon we encountered the big problem. If you have a hospital, for instance, with 500 beds, they easily want to track and trace 10 to 20 times as much as assets. If you imagine that every asset gives you an update every 5 to 10 seconds, you're talking about an amazing amount of data. So what we then did is we spoke, of course, with some FileMaker developers, and we soon came to the conclusion that sending all the data to FileMaker was not going to work. So we put Amazon in between and all their serverless technologies, and we used FileMaker to build very fast applications on top of this AWS infrastructure. So the way hospitals are using our solution right now, because it was your question, it's really about very basic information. Where is a bed? Where is a pump? Where is a monitor? They are losing a lot of time by finding this type of equipment. And there is, I think, in my opinion, also a serious amount of theft in hospitals, because these are public places. People can just go in and walk outside with a pump and sell it on eBay or whatever, and things happen. So,
and in the hospitals that you've deployed, have you gotten any feedback on how it's been able to help response in the COVID crisis? Or
well, for us, COVID was like a gift from heaven. So there are also positive things about COVID. First of all, they are currently hospitals are hiring a lot of extra equipment to do monitoring of patients. And when you hire equipment, of course, you need to know where something is in a hospital. The other thing we discovered also is that, for instance, they have now zones in hospitals. They call them COVID-19 zones. And for instance, beds and pumps, they're not allowed to leave these zones. So we help them addressing these challenges by knowing where something is and sending notification if a certain item is leaving a zone.
And you had implemented machine learning in terms of automatically mapping the initial location of some of these assets. Is that accurate?
Yeah, actually, most existing RTLS systems, they call them real-time location systems, are working based upon 3D maps, indoor maps of hospitals using triangulation.
Okay.
From the beginning, we took the decision, and in fact, it was a demand from the hospital. They said, we don't want to see on a map where something is. We want to know in which room something is. Yeah. So we took a total different approach where we really used machine learning to train the system, the notice of what's a room. And so when you ask our system where is an asset, we are not going to show it you on a map. We will show it's in building A, floor 2, in room 212. And we use machine learning for that. And then the next step is we also use machine learning, for instance, to see how often assets are being used, etc.
Wow. Okay. Excuse me. So that's great. So you're saving the client time and also saving the client money. Those are always two good propositions going into an engagement. Niousha, as you work with Claris developers and they're excited about this kind of technology, but they may not know, exactly where to begin. What kind of projects are you working with them on, and what could you recommend to people as kind of some easy wins, some ways to get started?
Absolutely. This is a great question. I believe that today AI exists in every single software and in every industry. And the main reason that AI has been adopted into many industries is its ROI. As you just mentioned, and Gery just mentioned, it improves efficiency, it reduces cost, it helps businesses grow in a scalable manner. But to your question on where the companies can actually take AI and deploy it within their systems, I can give you some examples. So
that'd be great.
Let's take manufacturing as an example. In this field, predictive maintenance, which is enabled by both sensor integration and machine learning, actually can lead to 50% less failure and 10 to 40% cost reduction. Another example that Gery mentioned was the healthcare industry, where AI could be used in many different, pain points. Some examples are reducing hospital readmissions that we earlier spoke with Gery before. We could accurately predict patient state and provide the most relevant care to the patient so that it's a healthier outcome for the patient, but also an improvement in the hospital readmissions for the hospitals. Another example is financial services, where a broad set of applications exist, from fraud detection to stock market prediction. And lastly, some other applications such as conversational AI and conversational intelligence has been reported to account for at least $8 billion per year in cost savings in the next few years. So when I think about where AI could be adopted, many industries and many software comes to my mind. But where we can, I think, start with AI, I believe there are three classes of AI that we can start with. The first class of AI is the most basic of them for automations. And this is where the repetitive tasks happen within the companies. And by providing, that automation, we can improve the performance, but also we can reduce the human error. That is where RPA, or robotic process automation, can be extremely helpful. The second class of automations, or AI, is where I believe that we require more intelligence, and that will require more data. It could come from sensors and IoT devices, but also from any other sources that we're capturing data from. And these cases, most of the time, are the cases that human resources are doing a great job at. And by teaching and training a machine and learning from that data, we can make sure that for the basic and more, less important experiences, we can actually replace AI for being, in charge. And an example would be, for example, natural language processing, or NLP, which have been in the space. It has been progressing really well in the machine learning space, and conversational chatbots are created on top of them, not only for internal use cases such as IT organizations, but also external facing and customer facing applications such as customer support and sales. This is mainly improving efficiency and providing free resources so that they could actually work on more important products and projects. And lastly, and another example for this class of AI and automation is an example that I actually demoed it in the morning. If you haven't watched the keynote, I really encourage everyone to go back and watch it again. We demoed an OCR, which is optic character recognition, POC, which could be utilized for digitizing paper forms. And that's another example that data could be super useful for training a machine to digitize the paper forms in a matter of a few clicks. So this is how powerful the data and AI could be. The last class of automations and AI applications is super interesting for myself because I believe that we can take AI to the next level. In addition to reducing human errors, in addition to improving efficiency, we can now create a differentiation or a competitive advantage to the competitors for the businesses. And that is by allowing them to train models themselves internally, even without any resources on the data science or machine learning engineering side, by allowing them to train the models for predicting sales, supply and demand, fraud, and those are specifically useful for creating a differentiation and setting the company to be ahead of the market. So in summary, I really believe that AI could be utilized in many industries, in many formats, as long as the data is there and the use case is very clear. We can actually build a step-by-step procedure to go from class 1 to class 3 in order to create that efficiency and also bring differentiation to the market.
That's great, Niousha. Thanks. You touched on a number of applications there where you're, interacting with customers, other members of the public potentially. One of the key questions that comes up a lot when we look at many machine learning and IoT applications is that of security and privacy. So could you maybe share some best practices to think about as developers delve into those kinds of issues?
I want to take a step back and think of AI applications as a way to accelerating the move to the cloud systems. And the reason I'm actually saying this, and I'm starting with this, is because I believe cloud has capabilities for data storage, privacy, and security that if you want to enable them on-prem, it's going to be a hassle, it's going to be costly, it requires resources that should be technical, and you might not have enough budget or access to those resources. So I believe the main thing to mention here is that with AI, we need enough data to be able to train models, to be able to train and test models on top of the right use cases. And nowadays, we have huge amounts of data that are coming from different sources. So there's this volume of data that is huge. There is this velocity of the data, and there's this variety of the data that is coming from multiple sources to us. And with this amount of data storage is incredibly important. And in the past years, there has been great progress in cloud storage systems. And if we want to do it again on-prem, it is going to be very resource intensive, very costly, and it requires technical expertise as well. So this is one area that I believe cloud could be super interesting, mainly because there are, let's say, regulations, GDPR in Europe, HIPAA compliance. If you want to comply with all of those regulations on-prem, again, not only you need expertise on data storage and infrastructure, but also you need domain expertise on how the regulations should work, so that if there's any audience, if there's any auditing or any checking of the systems, you can actually respond to that in the right way. So this is one area that I think is where AI and clouds could move AI into another level. And the second layer is data processing to me, and that also requires another level of again, compliance and regulations, and even data access and privileges. And on data processing specifically, with this huge amount of data being stored on the cloud or on-prem, there should be access to distributed CPUs or GPUs where the model could be trained. And again, this one also is very resource intensive and very costly if it's done in-house and on-prem. And again, I believe that the role of cloud is super interesting and super important here. And what we offer at Claris is a multi-platform strategy. As I spoke in the morning, we want to be offering a multi-platform strategy so that the customers and the partners of Claris can actually select the platform of their choice, and we help them to get to the level of AI and intelligence for even no coders, low coders, and pro coders on top of that platform. I hope I answered your question.
Oh, it's a great answer. Great answer. Actually, you raised a couple of great points that I wanted to pitch back to Gery, because Gery, I think you have been at the center of a lot of the issues that Niousha raises, both in terms of healthcare, regulatory environment. When we spoke a few months ago, and you had told me a bit about SenseNexus, you mentioned you described AWS and FileMaker as a marriage made in heaven. So if you could just speak briefly kind of about how you brought those things together.
Well, the problem with FileMaker is it's a very nice solution to build very fast, nice-looking prototypes. But when it comes to an immense amount of data like we have with all the IoT data flowing in, it's not the right solution. Yeah. So if all the data intake happens on AWS, and what we did then is using FileMaker as a kind of a very nice UI on top of that with the applications running in FileMaker. And that was for us really a marriage made in heaven. So using the ease of use, the very fast prototyping possibilities of FileMaker in combination with the scalability and the serverless architecture that AWS is promoting.
Thanks, Gery. I also wanted to circle back to Eric. Eric, some of the things that Niousha mentioned in terms of some of this predictive maintenance, is that something that you're experimenting with or you see on the horizon for dealing with some of your equipment?
Yeah, there's life cycles with certain pipes and joints and valves and all these things, and I think that one of the areas that our maintenance crew is starting to focus on is, rather than have a water leak in the middle of the day, why don't we fix that like when it gets to 40,000 hours or whatever that it's rated for. So there's a lot of that as soon as we start building out more of our infrastructure with IoT, we'll be doing that predictive analytics with maintenance, because there's nothing, our cycle time is so slow. We make a record every 30 seconds. So if our plant's down for an hour to fix a 90-degree little pipe joint, that's a lot of money, and it takes a lot of time to recover from that. So yeah, I see unlimited potential in this to make maintenance to-do lists, and rather than just chasing these things down, every Saturday, you come in, you do the 15 things that your IoT devices tell you that you have to do. So yeah, we're working on that, and I like I said, sky's the limit there.
Got it. And Steve, we had chatted a little bit about also where do folks get started, experimenting with some of these technologies, and some of what I got from you was that in terms of the initial investment, it need not be a very substantial investment. It's pretty easy to get started, but that sometimes developers need to think a little bit differently about how they approach these kinds of challenges.
And absolutely, as when we're saying in one of the earlier sessions today about his sensor built on top of a Raspberry Pi, and the sorts of sensors that Eric's talking about are very similar. These are often very, very cost-effective pieces of equipment, and you sort of at that point, it's how do you get that piece of equipment talking to a system that you can do your data processing with. And yeah, there are obviously some hurdles to getting into that. But one of the things that I found often with IoT devices is that the interfaces that they work with are very, very simple. And so if you can get past how you translate that interface into a FileMaker system, all of a sudden you can take all of the things that you do in FileMaker and apply that to that data packet that you get. You know, RFID readers are a great example of that sort of thing, because basically all you're getting from the RFID reader is a location and you know, a tag ID and a reader ID. And at that point, that's where the systems that you've got in FileMaker come into play. Now, there is that learning curve to get over. How do I get that tag read from my RFID reader into FileMaker? But once you've got there, it's using the skills that you've already got. I think what you're alluding to in the conversation that we were having was my sort of thinking around how a lot of people who have worked with FileMaker for a long time think of themselves as being FileMaker developers. And whereas what I was sort of saying is that for a lot of people, if they kind of take away the fact that they're a FileMaker developer and think of themselves as a developer, then when you make that move, whether it be to look at writing JavaScript for some of the new integrations that we can see coming with FileMaker, or whether it's having to write that little bit of Python code that Wim talked about, you know, 60 lines of Python to make that bridge, you'd be amazed at how many similarities there are between, you know, the language structures that you use in FileMaker. Yes, in FileMaker, you tend to use a more of a WYSIWYG kind of editor to build up your script, to build up your program. But a lot of those structures and so on are very, very similar to what you see when you start looking at JavaScript or at Python or one of those other languages that's perhaps more amenable to that translation between IoT device and FileMaker. You know, with one project that I'm working on at present, the only bit that I'm doing is again, a few lines of Python that call a FileMaker script, and they pass the parameter of the tag ID and the location ID to that FileMaker script, and then all of that complex logic that needs to be done to make this work goes on in there. And as I was saying earlier, FileMaker developers are really good at finding creative ways to solve problems. And as lots of people have said, oftentimes you can read the manual, you can copy the sample code, and you can probably get it to work. And once you've crossed that bridge and you're back in FileMaker, then, you know, all of us know what we're doing at that point.
Great, great. Well, I'm seeing a few questions coming in from the attendees. I think the first one is a good, potentially good one for Niousha. So one question is, let's see, what are approaches that could be used for machine learning on FileMaker for Windows, for example, process mining?
And that's a great question. So I need to educate myself on process mining.
Okay.
But basically, we want to be dedicated to multi-platform strategy. So whether you are on Windows or other platforms, it shouldn't be really impacting the way that we're offering machine learning capabilities on top of FileMaker for you. If there is a specific use case that you're interested, I encourage you to connect with me, and we can discuss, and we can actually see where in the roadmap we can actually put that. Okay.
And then the next one is 5 billion IoT devices. How do we keep them from becoming attack vectors on data? Plays into some of the security discussion we had earlier.
Gery, do you have anything on that side? I know that you've been very active on the regulatory and security and privacy of the data.
Well, it's not 5 billion. It's probably going to be very soon 5 trillion. Once the first battery-free Bluetooth tags come out. But that's indeed something that's the way we address it. It's to make sure that we offer end-to-end encryption with all kind of certificates. But it's indeed a challenge, and you see a lot in the news that IoT devices are getting hacked and being used for things that they shouldn't be used for. So it really starts with building the architecture from the start in a very secure way.
Mm-hmm.
Just coming back to what I was just saying about the fact that you're often using a little bit of code to get something into FileMaker. I think that's one of the other things that FileMaker does incredibly well. FileMaker's got security completely nailed. And so if the exposure you're placing your system to is very, very limited and it's very controlled, then basically you can use all of those pre-existing FileMaker structures to make sure that you're minimizing your risk. And then from there, it's about...
they've been tested and vetted. Is that the idea?
Sorry?
I'm sorry, Steve. Because they've been tested and vetted. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
FileMaker's security model is very, very robust. The person asking the question about the 5 billion IoT devices is one of the foremost experts in FileMaker security. And so, a bit of a leading question there. But FileMaker security is known to be incredibly robust. And so if you're minimizing your external exposure and you're closely monitoring what's happening at those access points, then it can be reasonably easily mitigated.
Great. Eric, I wanted to ask, you had referred to training earlier on as one of the benefits of the investments that you've made. Could you maybe drill down on that a little bit? How has it helped with training staff at Furnace?
Well, just being able to capture more information and really drill down into where the successes and where the problems are. It just allows us, when we first started this, we were focused on training, over here, and we realized all of these other issues were popping up because data was just being served to us through the database, telling us that really we need to focus on just little things like I keep coming back to Steam because I live in Steam world, but this consistency of Steam, you got to keep checking your records and once we got that kind of hammered out and we got our we spent months and months with our boiler manufacturer to fix the problems that we found through the IoT devices, through that data. We were able to have our staff focus on the more important stuff and not have to worry about these things that we didn't know were a problem until we just were getting bad records, but we didn't know where they came from. So now it just allows us to really focus on the core focus of the job at hand, as opposed to chasing all these problems. So the return on investment was immediate in that sense, because the more data you have, and the more that you can, actually make sense of it, and you can see where you're having successes and where you're having failures, it allows you to, focus on the stuff that's really important and just kind of ignore everything else. So that's probably been the greatest and most immediate impact. Excellent, thank you.
Gery, we have another one for you. You mentioned the scalability of AWS with FileMaker. Someone wants to know if you're using another database engine in AWS and FileMaker on top of that.
Yeah, exactly. So we are using, in fact, a couple of AWS serverless applications. We use IoT and Kinesis. This is really for the data intake. All the data is then dumped in a non-structured database called DynamoDB. From there, it's being transferred into AuroraDB, which is a structured database. And on top of that, we are using Cloud API of FileMaker to sync the databases with FileMaker. That's how it works.
Great, thank you so much. All right, well, I think we have time for one more question. So I'm going to go around the horn, so to speak, and ask folks if they see anything on the horizon that they're particularly looking forward to in terms of making these kinds of applications more powerful or more accessible, easier to produce. So why don't we start with, we'll take it in the initial order, start with Eric.
Well, I think I'm not the developer within the organization, but I can tell you that our in-house developer who works, with some external folks as well, she's really excited about just the fact that everything works now, and it's so much easier to stitch everything together. And she's really excited about Claris Connect, and I'm asking her to focus on these things, but she's so excited about the new, gadgets and new ways of doing things that she's, fixing our database from the core and rebuilding it from the core, because she's like, all right, now we can do so much. All these things that we've been talking about forever are now, so much easier. So I'm glad that she's excited, and it's our development has sped up quite a bit. So
got it. Steve, last word.
I think it's a similar sort of thing. We're at the point where IoT devices are becoming so prevalent. Someone was making jokes about, are we turning this into the next Skynet? Obviously, it's a risk, but for me, I think the interesting thing is how the use of these devices can drive process change and organizational change to basically streamline operations in the way Eric's talking about, where you can go from having a lot of data that is interesting, but how do you then apply that? And so I think the technology side of it is kind of there, and now it's how we go about taking that data and moving forward in terms of business impact.
All right, thank you so much, Steve. I want to thank all my panelists, Eric Astor, Steve Winter, Gery Pollet, and Niousha Zadeh, and I'm going to hand it back to Janine. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Ross, and thanks everybody. It was a really intelligent discussion, and I appreciate it so much. Just a reminder to all of you, I think Ross mentioned it at the beginning, but we did partner with him and Reticle Research on a really interesting IoT report. So be on the lookout for that coming up here in the next few weeks. So we hope that you'll explore it further. It's really interesting. And I want to just thank everybody again for joining us, and remind you to stick around for our next session, Cloud Smart Security, coming up in about 10 to 15 minutes. And once again, please join us through the end of the day today, and don't forget to join us for the closing session. And Engage doesn't end after that. It continues on demand. We hope you'll explore the on-demand sessions as contributed by the amazing members of our community in Claris Academy. Thanks, everybody. It's been great being with you, and we will see you again soon. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.